Turing Institute's Special Interest Group for Computer Vision and Digital Heritage. And we have two speakers, Katie McDonough, who is a historian of 18th century France working at the intersection of political culture and the history of science and technology. Before joining the Turing Institute as a senior research associate on the Living with Machines project, Katie was an academic technology specialist in the Department of History and the Center for Interdisciplinary Digital Research at Stanford University. And speaking with Katie today, also from the Living with Machines project, is Daniel Wilson. He is a historian of modern Britain with a background in the history of science and technology. Daniel has taught and worked at the universities of Cambridge and Paris. His current research focuses on the politics of work, data, and information, on the history of mechanization, and the history of mapping. Daniel has been involved in helping develop new digital and computational techniques to address old historical problems in new ways. And this includes a new approach to using maps as historical sources, which has emerged from a radical interdisciplinary collaboration with colleagues at the Turing Institute. Over to you guys.
Great, thank you, Laura, and thanks to all the people who have organized today. So we're going to dive right in with an example of our work on the Living with Machines project and how that broadened out to the special interest group that we'll talk about at the end. So that's us. So Living with Machines, what is it? It's a large interdisciplinary project. As Daniel's bio sort of suggested, we describe it as a radical collaboration between curators, historians, computational linguists, and data scientists. We use digital collections from the long 19th century, and we use computational methods to analyze these sources. This is the team. We're quite large, but the work that we'll be describing here involves many of these people, and so we wanted to be sure to highlight their contributions. All right, so Living with Machines is kind of an exciting project because of the way we're trying to work with digital materials at scale. The project is interested in understanding sort of writing new histories of industrialization in 19th century Britain. And we've really honed in on paying attention to industrialization as it varies over both time and space. So as you can see here, I've kind of highlighted that traditionally researchers in various disciplines will make claims about industrialization based on either case studies. So these would be like very high resolution information, for example, based on archival research. Or they make claims based on national aggregates using very low resolution national or perhaps county level statistics and models that they use based on that aggregate information. For example, aggregated population data from the census. But we really want to be able to move between these scales and identify otherwise hidden patterns that each of these approaches can't really find on their own. And so we've paid attention to linking information by place over time. Place is a relatively standard entity, which allows us to pay special attention to what we might call fairly neglected spatial dynamics of industrialization. And so there's lots of work that we have to do to make the most of spatial information in historical sources. These contentions apply arguably to more straightforward case of text-based sources, but they become even more interested when we start to look at visual materials. All right, so visual materials. We were interested in working with maps. They're one of the largest sets of digitized materials for 19th century Britain, alongside things like newspapers. And they're also one of the most important sources of spatial information about the 19th century. And what I'm talking about here are the topographical maps created by the Ordnance Survey beginning in the early part of the century. And so what I want to kind of ask you to think about is using maps as data in this computational way. And a lot of times we think about digitized maps as sheets that we can browse, recreating the reading room experience of looking at one or a few maps at a time, simply kind of translating that to the digital environment. But actually, there's a lot more that we can do. There's other ways of engaging with maps en masse. And so the kind of idea of distantly reading maps, taking this language from the distant reading of texts, is a method that we can apply to collections that have been digitized, for example, by the National Library of Scotland and other libraries and archives. So our approach is less about extracting information from the maps and really more about allowing researchers, especially humanities researchers, to have a way to redefine what we understand to be the kind of computational approach to working with maps, to develop a method that saves information defined by humanities researchers as some aspect of the map content and retaining a connection to that source material. And this is where computer vision comes in, because we're really interested in what historical OS maps can tell us about how Victorians represented the British landscape. Computer vision methods, and you've seen lots of examples of these in the two previous presentations, allow us to generate data sets based on these 19th century choices. And so the question that we began with when we were interested in working with maps and using computer vision was indeed how we could design a computer vision method that acknowledges that maps are not a ground truth. They are not simply a representation of what was the physical landscape in the 19th century. They're a primary source that allows us to understand what Victorians saw, and in particular what the Ordnance Survey employees and administrators wanted to communicate about the industrializing landscape. So with that, I just want to say a word about our collections and really this computational approach to thinking as a collection as a queryable, a searchable corpus. So one of our main collections that we've been doing some early experiments on is the National Library of Scotland 6-inch to 1 mile second edition maps, which you see here in this beautiful visualization made by our colleague Olivia Vane. And what you're really looking at here is a chronological animation based on the survey date for each and every sheet. And there are over 15,000 sheets here. And the important point to make here is the only reason we're really able to kind of see the maps in this way and to later work with them in the computer vision pipeline and retaining that link to the source material is because of item level metadata. I know there's a lot of people who work with metadata on a daily basis in the audience, and I cannot stress enough how much it makes working with these materials a richer experience. We're able to think about the complex temporalities of these sheets. The second edition isn't something that appeared in 1 year, it appeared over the course of multiple decades. We have to account for that whenever we want to talk about what we find in these cartographic representations of industrialization. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Daniel.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks, Laura, and everyone else. So hopefully Katie's given you a sense there of, among other things, how complex this corpus of maps is in terms of its chronology and different scales at play, among other things. And what I'm going to do now is just very briefly talk about the actual research pipeline that we came up with, which gives us a very different way of working with these maps than has been previously possible. And that includes even the fantastic portal that you'll find on the NLS website, which I think someone in the chat just referred to, which I urge you to go and look at and play with. But in a way, it limits you, as Katie suggested, to viewing the map as a reader would in the reading room. And what we're trying to do is something quite different. So as researchers, we wondered whether we could borrow an approach from the medical sciences, where it's typical to divide images up into smaller parts, often known as patches, in order to get more detailed information on those small segments of maps. So we tried to divide up our maps, because they're so rich with visual information, into smaller, more manageable pieces, which we call patches. So what I'm going to describe, we are now calling our patchwork method. And the idea is really to return to these as primary sources and ask what they can tell us about the world that you can't really see, even with typical geographical information science approaches. GIS is a well-established method for extracting information from text sources, like, for example, railway freight tables, all kinds of other things, which allow you to build your own map of phenomenon such as a railway network. But by working with these images directly, looking at them, as it were, through computer vision, we're able to classify ourselves using labels that are useful for our own research, each of these individual patches, which makes it then possible to query a whole region, or even the nation all at once. So if you move on one slide, please, Katie. So our process was to annotate, first of all, as historians, domain experts, as data scientists call us. And what we did was came up with the method of patching up these maps into smaller squares. And what you can see here on the right is a window from our own annotation tool, which actually became a place where, if you like, research really happened and developed, and research questions became clarified through an iterative process, where a concept is defined by a researcher, like a historian, a concept that they might want to search for on a map, through a process of trying to find those phenomena on the map. We would then clarify with increasing detail what it is exactly that we want to find on the map. And from that, we develop a set of labels. And those labels are really the thing that you're searching for when doing research. There are questions about what patch size should you use. There's a kind of Goldilocks quality about that decision. Depends somewhat on the phenomenon you're looking for. I'm going to talk a little bit about rail. So for us, we were interested in trying to find different parts of the rail network, but not just the network, more the kind of footprint in the landscape. So this suggests a slightly different approach to the kind of network view of the railway, and tells us something a little bit more qualitative about the way that that stuff, if you like, sits in the landscape in relation to other things next to it. And that's where linking sources really comes into its own. The question we asked was, can we find and also search for visual patterns between these patches to try and find distributions of similarity and difference? So if you like, are there patterns that repeat themselves across the country, which we can only find by looking through this somewhat abstract lens? Research questions that historians would be interested in include questions about the way that rail then reshapes communities across the country. How does rail relate to other industrial sites, to residential developments, and the removals of residential areas in 19th century cities, which has been a big interest for historians for many years. Can you move on one slide, please, Katie? Yeah, so our patchwork method that we have developed has just, well, we just published this article actually last week in the Journal of Victorian Culture. If you're interested to read more about the way that the method works and the kinds of things you can do with it, this piece goes into some of the more theoretical and historical implications of the method. And just to give you one final quick sense of the kind of things this lends itself to, if you just skip us forward, Katie, one more slide, I'm going to show you here an image from a visualization tool called Kepler that we've been having fun playing with, which basically can take output in the form of, well, a CSV file or that kind of thing. And what you see in this image is the blue circles mark the centroid of one of our square patches, and the different colors show you the confidence with which the classifier we trained has predicted that those patches contain either rail space which we're looking for or not. So this kind of thing in a way as a playful visualization, but at the same time, it's an important part of how we see the research working, in the sense that you can use this kind of visualization, show it back to historians, geographers, and other people, and try to generate new insights, new hypotheses for research that you then want to test, and likewise can suggest other archives, collections, things on a local level that might be relevant for further linking. So it was in the course of this very specific piece of research about rail, which depended very much on computer vision, that our new special interest group emerged, which Katie will now say more about.
Yeah, thank you. So that's right. We really, in doing this work, started talking to people, many of whom are in the room, about the challenges and opportunities for using computer vision with cultural heritage materials. For us, that's maps. For other people, it's books, and all kinds of other sources. And so that was at the heart of the founding of the Computer Vision for Digital Heritage Special Interest Group, which is based at the Alan Turing Institute, but is not exclusive to people who work there. It's very much a welcome and open group to anyone in any country, in any discipline, who has an interest in the combination of these two things. And some of our guiding questions you can see here are, how do computer vision methods developed for other types of images perform on digitized heritage content? And as you've seen, like, it's really exciting to think about this because indeed then it lends itself to rethinking and redesigning new methods that are more appropriate for, say, historical sources. We're interested in how heritage institutions and researchers can work together to improve accessibility to scanned image collections, because indeed getting access to images that may have been digitized by third-party entities or have different kinds of licensing or other permissions, it's a bit of a minefield, and together we can understand those challenges and advocate for better research access. And finally, how do we effectively and responsibly work with image collections at scale using these automated methods? This is really an important question about thinking about the ethics of using computer vision in the GLAM and research sectors. And we're really excited to think about that from a variety of directions. Just in terms of sort of energy use when we run these models, to the cost of storage, and making these methods accessible to people who do not have extensive computational resources at their home institutions is incredibly important. So in the past, you can see some of the presentations we've had, including Giles, Thomas Smithson, Melvin Wevers have talked about a really exciting article that they published on the visual turn in digital humanities. We've had the collaborators from the University of Southern California and University of Colorado at Boulder, who are part of the Linked Maps project, which was one of the kind of pioneers in thinking about how you can use computer vision with historical map collections. Polly Hudson and her colleagues Hendrik Harold and Robert Hecht have talked about the Coloring London and what is now indeed a kind of global collection of coloring cities projects around the world, and thinking about using computer vision to annotate building footprints and understanding historical housing stock for modern energy sort of evaluation purposes. And then finally, a sort of evidence that images are not just about things like cats and dogs and buildings, but also computer vision is used to improve our access to historical text materials. And this is Ben Lee's work and really just in general, the Library of Congress's work on improving image and OCR recognition for historical newspapers. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying that we welcome you at our future events. I think Daniel is going to share the link to the SIG, and there's a link to the form where you can sign up and join the mailing list. These are some of the ways that you can participate. And please do just get in touch with us if you have other ideas that we haven't mentioned here. And we look forward to seeing you and hearing from you in the future. Thank you.